The old cultural shortcut says Xennials are just confused millennials and or young Gen X with better Wi-Fi. Cute. But no. People born roughly between 1976 and 1985 were not formed inside the internet. They were formed before it, then handed it midstream. Like someone changing the rules of a board game while your hand is already on the dice. So the stereotype inversion is simple. The weirdness is not immaturity. It is adaptation residue. The overprocessing. The awkward pause before responding. The strange ability to understand a rotary phone, a group chat, a fax machine, and workplace Slack politics without fully belonging to any of them. That is not smooth optimization. That is cognitive load with a trench coat on. And it creates a very specific kind of internal math, competent enough to translate between worlds, aware enough to doubt yourself in both. That is where the whole imposter circus begins. Because the more a Xennial understands, the less clean the world looks. They can see the analog rulebook, they can see the digital rulebook. They can see how both are lying a little. Meanwhile, someone with a lower resolution map walks into the room and says, "It is not that complicated." Adorable. That is basically the Dunning-Kruger effect wearing business casual. The Xennial brain is doing metacognition in the background, auditing every answer before it leaves the mouth. Was that too formal? Was that email too cold? Did I sound old? Did I sound like I was trying too hard to sound young? This is not indecision. It is predictive simulation from someone trained by two incompatible operating cultures. They learned conscious competence the hard way, first by memorizing the old world, then by manually installing the new one, then by pretending the installation process did not cost them anything. So yes, they can function, often extremely well. But their confidence arrives late, sweaty, and holding 17 tabs of context. And once your brain gets used to auditing itself like that, synchronized life starts to feel suspicious. Regular schedules, standard career ladders, clean generational labels, all of it starts sounding a little too neat for a nervous system that knows every normal system eventually changes the password without warning. There is also a timing problem nobody talks about enough. Xennials grew up in analog rhythm, but reached adulthood during digital acceleration. That means their nervous system learned boredom before bandwidth. It learned waiting before instant replies. It learned privacy before every thought became a searchable little fossil. Then, right as careers were supposed to stabilize, the labor market started doing its charming little magic trick where security disappears and everyone is told to be flexible. So the Xennial schedule often turns asynchronous. Not because they are lazy, because the quiet hours are the only hours where the machine stops throwing confetti at their face. Late night becomes the workshop. Early morning becomes the reset button. Low input environments become sacred because that is where the old analog brain can finally sort the digital noise into piles. This is the life course development part. Their adaptation was not optional. It was a survival bridge between eras. And when a person keeps crossing that bridge alone, external feedback gets thin. So the mind starts creating its own loop, its own narration, its own private little radio station in the skull. That is why so many Xennials talk things out loud. Not in a dramatic movie villain way, in a I need to hear the thought before I trust it way. They grew up solving problems without a search bar, then entered adulthood where every answer became instant, but somehow less calming. So verbal processing becomes a tool, a little workbench, a way to take the mess out of the head and place it on the table where it can be handled. This is Vygotsky in private speech, but in normal human terms, sometimes the brain borrows the mouth because the working memory is full.
Keys in pocket.
Keys, wallet, charger,
notes
email,
1, 2,
callback.
3.
Do not forget the thing.
And the reminder.
Then someone walks in and the mask slams down. Because apparently narrating your own survival checklist in aisle 7 is weird. Sure, very reasonable society we built here. But once a person uses speech to stabilize thought, their predictive simulation gets faster. And that is where the future starts getting loud. Xennials are very good at imagining what could go wrong, almost offensively good. A vague calendar invite appears and suddenly the mind has built 12 possible social outcomes. 3 career implications, 1 financial subplot, and a backup personality. This is not just anxiety being theatrical. It is a hyperactive default mode network doing overtime with no union protection. The analog childhood taught them to read rooms. The digital transition taught them that rules can mutate overnight. The economic shocks taught them that stability is often just marketing with better lighting. So of course the brain starts modeling threats before they arrive. Of course it scans for cracks. Of course it treats calm like a suspiciously quiet appliance. The hyperbrain creates the MAP. The hyperbody pays the bill. That is the cruel little trade. A brilliant forecast system attached to a body that still has to digest lunch like nothing happened. And because so much energy goes into macro-level threat simulation, the tiny everyday details start getting abandoned on the side of the road. The Xennial can explain how workplace culture changed after smartphones. They can mediate between a boomer manager and a Gen Z employee without anyone bursting into flames. They can remember the emotional temperature of a conversation from 2009. But where are the sunglasses? No idea. What was the password? Gone. Why did they walk into this room? A historical mystery. This is bandwidth allocation, not stupidity. Cognitive load has a budget, and their budget is constantly being spent on translation, context, risk assessment, and social calibration. So yes, the surface level tracking gets messy. Names slip, tabs multiply, objects vanish in plain sight. But underneath that chaos is a mind choosing deep state pattern work over remembering which drawer contains the tape. Not elegant, still functional, mostly. And then there is the language thing. Xennials can be weirdly precise with words, and then suddenly drop one tiny forbidden word like a wrench on a glass table. Not because they lack vocabulary, please. The swear word is not failure, it is compression. Sometimes frustrating is too weak, sometimes suboptimal is corporate wallpaper. Sometimes the cleanest emotional data packet is just, this is bullshit. That is lexical efficiency. A taboo word bypassing the polite little security guard at the front desk and delivering the actual meaning straight to the room. But that kind of input-output speed has a cost. Because a mind that absorbs language that precisely usually absorbs everything else too. Tone, lighting, subtext, notifications, body language, the tiny pause after sure. The way a room changes when one person enters it. The weird half-second delay in a reply that tells you the conversation has shifted. For Xennials, this is where the analog-digital transition becomes brutally physical. They were trained in face-to-face reading, then dropped into endless digital signals with no stable translation key. A period can mean punctuation, or murder. A thumbs up can mean agreement, or passive-aggressive workplace warfare. A delayed reply can mean someone is busy, or the entire social contract has collapsed. So the bandwidth allocation problem gets worse. Their system is processing physical rooms and digital rooms at the same time. The coffee shop noise, the email tone, the Slack ping, the family group chat, the old school obligation to be reachable but not rude, the new school expectation to be instantly responsive but somehow emotionally regulated. Of course they get tired. Of course they need quiet. Of course they disappear for a while and call it being busy, when really their nervous system is lying face down on the carpet trying to become furniture. This is not fragility. It is environmental sensitivity after a lifetime of translating unstable signals. So the full picture is not Xennials are confused, that is lazy. The full picture is that Xennials are carrying a micro-generational workload most people do not even notice. They were built in one world, upgraded in another, employed during repeated shocks, and then asked to become cultural interpreters for everyone standing on either side of them. Too analog to be fully digital, too digital to be fully analog, too young to claim old world detachment, too old to pretend the internet has always been oxygen. That in-between position creates overprocessing, asynchronous rhythm, predictive simulation, and a very specific exhaustion. that looks like inconsistency from the outside, but from the inside, it is just the cost of running two maps at once. One map says, wait, observe, do not overshare. Privacy matters. The other map says, respond, update, brand yourself, be available. And the Xennial is standing between them with a dead phone battery, a perfectly calibrated social radar, and no desire to explain why they need 3 business days to recover from a group chat. That is the reframing, not broken, not behind, not secretly failing adulthood. A bridge generation with bridge fatigue, a translator generation with translator migraines, a high-context nervous system living in a low-context speed culture, and once that clicks, the shame loses some of its teeth. Because the behaviors were never random. The delayed confidence, the private speech, the strange memory gaps, the emotional forecasting, the selective disappearance, the sudden precise profanity. All of it belongs to the same blueprint. A person formed before instant access, forced into permanent access, and still trying to protect a little analog silence inside a digital storm. And if that made something in your chest unclench, that is probably not an accident. That is recognition. So subscribe if you want the next layer, because the next piece goes even deeper into why this micro-generation keeps feeling older, younger, sharper, and more tired than the room can explain.